The last few years, I've been kind of exploring the idea of like food webs and ecological relationships, and kind of how, I think, and I'm really interested in like threatened and endangered species, and so I think a lot of times we think about when we're protecting a creature, an organism, whether it's a plant or an animal or whatever, we think about that individual creature without really kind of recognizing that that creature lives in a context. And so just protecting an individual organism really requires that we take that context into account and really kind of protect the whole system, not just the individual organism. And so, so I've done a whole bunch of these pieces that are kind of focused on the way that a particular organism fits in its ecosystem. And so this one is about snowy plovers. That's the bird in the middle, and the dune ecology that is part of their habitat. It's not the only thing they use on the beach, of course, but I think the dunes are also kind of a threatened ecosystem, especially in California. Our coastal dunes are really impacted by all kinds of things: development, erosion, climate change, all those things. And so I wanted to kind of focus on the snowy plover, which is such a a kind of like a lovable little creature. They're these like sweet little birds that live on the beach, and they're super cute, but also kind of describe the other things that share that habitat with them. And so there's a dune beetle, there's the legless lizard, and there's a few kind of subspecies of legless lizard, and the one in this piece is specific to the Monterey Dunes. So that's the black. They're almost totally black, and then their belly is kind of a bright yellow, so you just see a tiny bit of that yellow. The blue butterfly is actually the Smith's blue, which is also a threatened species. And pretty exclusively lives in dunes. And we have a population on the Monterey Bay. So down like near Marina Seaside area, there are Smith's blues down there. And I think in maybe a few other places in California, but pretty limited. Again, the dune habitat's really, it's been impacted quite a lot. And then the rest of the plants are all dune specific plants. So there's buckwheat, coast buckwheat, which is the host plant for the caterpillars of the Smith's blue. Sand verbena, which is just a beautiful plant. It's just such a pretty, cool plant. And then a lupin, Tidestrom's lupin, that lives in the dunes also. And we have lupins all over the place, but that one is specific to dune habitat. So yeah, and so this is a watercolor and pen and ink. It's probably, I don't remember the size exactly, but they're usually around like, pieces are usually around like 24, 26 inches square typically. So yeah, that's this piece.
Yeah, I really love stumbling upon dune plants on the beach. Sometimes because sometimes they are sort of like singular, like they're not really necessarily surrounded by a bunch of other plant life. And so you're just like, oh my gosh, this miraculous plant, like how are you surviving here? But that's great. We have at the museum's located across from Seabright Beach, and there's habitat restoration that's going on there, and snowy plovers nest there, and the verbena is some of my favorites. This is a lovely piece. We're really happy to have it in the show. And it's really interesting, I think, the way that you do the food webs, where you can do a landscape of all of these things together too, but I feel like I see all of the parts more clearly in this way. And then, like you said, like really showcasing the interaction and how they depend on each other. It's just, it's great. We love it.
Yeah, and I get to do a lot of fun research. And so like, for example, the lizard. So when I was this one took me a long time to figure out the layout, because I was like, well, how do I arrange the plants? And I don't want to do it in just like a random way. So I tried to put, like, the lizard often hangs out near the lupin. So I put the lizard near the lupin, the butterflies, of course, use the buckwheat. So I put the butterflies near the buckwheat, so I was trying to kind of make sure that, kind of connect those things a little bit too. But yeah, it can be kind of an interesting process. I spent a lot of time researching and reading and talking to scientists and making sure I get it right. Because of course, if I don't, so someone will tell me. They'll be like, well, what's happening there? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
No, because if it's not published, how am I supposed to know?
Megan, we do have a question before. I know at some point I do want to get further into the like that science side of what you do, but we do have a question about your kind of technique here from
sure.
Andrea. She's asking, why do you create circular compositions for your ecosystem pieces?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one of the things that this is where like the art part of my practice kind of comes up, because I think people really respond to circular images. I think there's something about circles that I just feel as humans, we just really relate to that and we connect to that. It's a way that we connect to each other, right? And it shows up in nature in all kinds of ways. And I think it kind of reflects the idea of like cycles and connection, and that there's no real boundary, right? There's no real border to, like, for example, an ecosystem. And so I like using the circle as a kind of a frame, to kind of give me a structure to work in. And I'll show you, I'll actually pull up. So there's, I don't know if you can see me scrolling, but there's a bunch of, I kind of put together some of the way I construct this, like the process. And so at the very beginning, this is how a lot of these pieces start, where there's, I use, this is all done on paper. I do it all by hand. So I use a compass and a protractor. And this is what I start with. I start with a circle, and it gives me kind of a structure for then setting up the composition. And it's kind of a way for me to like, narrow down, how am I going to arrange these things? How am I going to put them together? How are they going to be kind of positioned in relation to each other? And so, yeah, that's how they start. And then it just helps me kind of, it gives me kind of a frame to start with.
Do you ever, this is probably silly because you're doing it by hand, but like, do you ever just sort of take one plover and then rotate it and put it below?
I do. Well, yeah. So what I do is I can show you. So this is the inked version of the drawing, but yeah, I basically take I do a bunch of sketches. I figure out the position of the creature and all of that stuff. And then I do a drawing of it on a piece of tracing paper. And then like in this one, you'll see it. So I transfer it onto the paper in one time, and then I'll use the same drawing and just flip it and do it again. And so for something like the plover, it's really easy because there's only two. But when I was getting into the plants, then it was like, well, I was basically drawing like the flowers and I did some of the leaves, but then I, kind of mess around with like, well, where's the stem going to be and all of that. So I do some freehand, especially with plants, but yeah, I definitely use the same drawing for the same element.